Hi there, it's Richard Little, your land partner, and what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're on 38 or the 38th video of series of 100, taking us through the property development process from the very beginning in sourcing and through to acquiring, etc., all the way through to the end. We've now reached the point where we're talking about the full development appraisal. And now I'm going to talk about costs. I'm told costs, right? I'm talking about costs. So this is one of the most interesting ones in many ways. This is where the spreadsheet people come out to play, and it's great. I love myself a good spreadsheet or two. So we've previously covered high level costs, and high level costs generally go through, well, don't generally go through, they go through the gross developed value, the GDV as commonly known, build costs, developer contributions, professional fees, finance, developer's profit, and the residual site value. So the full development appraisal is building on that. So we may well have worked in the high level numbers, we'll have worked on values, etc. But now what we're looking at now, that's a relatively small spreadsheet. What we're looking at with the full development appraisal in terms of costs is breaking those down further. So we're looking for any wide ranging costs or values. We're looking for any anomalies that there might be. But what we're also looking for through this process, as with the whole of the full development appraisal, is what's actually involved. So the costing side of things is almost building the project all the way, start to finish. What is the cost? And cost obviously and time have got a direct relationship. So in terms of, I'm just going to go really through those sort of seven areas really, in terms of where we break them down and why we break them down, and every one of the costs areas that we talk about in the next 62 videos, we are at different points going to give you a much clearer indication of our own experience of certain costs, etc. So I'm not going to tell you how much something's going to cost to build tonight, because I don't know what the something is firstly, but that's normally what people want to know. But I just want to show you how you need to break down the high level numbers into basically more rows and columns on your spreadsheet. Now I'm fairly certain that we would have covered before that we work on ranges of numbers, because there's very few costs in the whole process that we can predict to be exact. Some are fairly tight, fair enough. We might have an arrangement perhaps with a lawyer on purchases or sales or whatever, that they do them at a certain rate. Okay, so that we're fairly comfortable on that. But actually in a full development appraisal, and we are using a full development appraisal to go through possibly 2 or 3 different schemes on a potential project. Now, we're pretty experienced, and we do not always do everything that we are telling you to do and showing you to do, because we sort of don't need to. But that's a very dangerous place to be. So even when I'm looking at something, and sort of somebody says, what do we think the cost might be on that demolition, for instance, I'm going to say possibly between 20,000 and 40 or 50. It's going to be a fairly wide band unless we are more comfortable with it. And when we've got a wide range, i.e. we're not quite sure, we're going to go out and, in that case, talk to one or two demolition people that we know, and sort of say, just have a quick look, there's some photos, don't need to go and visit the site, what do you think? And that will give us a little bit more assurance over the prices that we're putting, the numbers that we're putting down in the cost in the full development appraisal. So if we start off with the gross developed value, the GDV, so what we're looking for is, what's it going to be worth at the end? Now, regardless of what your potential project is going to be, whether it's, a block of apartments, or it's mixed use with some commercial, retail, whatever on the ground floor maybe, or some offices above it, or whatever it is there as a value. We need to put a value to it. Now, so what we're looking to do is put a market value, so we would always use a market value as in it's going to be sold, but we will also look more and more these days than we have done before, is we are also looking at what is it going to be worth if we hold it. So effectively, what is the value based on the income? Yeah, so most people will be familiar with that. So what we will also do is we won't have just one line that says 10 apartments at £150,000 each, or whatever it is, 1.5 million, if that's worked that out right. You know, that isn't enough. What we're actually looking for, because if there's a block of 10 apartments, they're not all going to be worth £150,000. Now, what we're trying to find out is actually, are the apartments going to be worth between 140 and 160, depending on where they are in the building, what way they're facing, how big they are, you know. So you could have a 2-bed apartment and it could be 100 square foot bigger than another one, but that doesn't always mean to say that it's going to be 100 square foot more value, because it depends on the design. So actually sometimes the smaller apartments can be worth as much, if not more, than the more spacious, if it's not very well designed. So we will look at, you know, and at this point we're not going to have, generally not going to have any detailed drawings. I mean, we look at a lot of stuff that's already got planning on it for various people and occasionally ourselves, and it's a good base point, because if it's got planning, then we can work out a value. We rarely go with the same planning, but it gives us a start. It gives us a site value, if you like. We're generally looking for enhanced, you know, beyond that. But anyway, so we will then look at sort of each apartment. If it's 10 apartments, each apartment, you know, what price do we think each apartment might be? Now, most people will sort of say, well, why don't you just do it as an average? Well, if we can actually get £10,000 extra on the GDV, that does make a lot of difference, because, you know, it might not seem a lot on 1.5 million, yeah, but 10 grand, just think about how much 10 grand is. Not 1.5 million, that's a lot, but 10 grand, that's quite a lot as well. Just imagine it in a heap, in cash, on your desk. That's how you need to visualize money. We talk about visualization. Visualize money and how much it would cost you. Oh, it's only another 4,000. It's only another 2,000. Might not work for everybody, but I just sort of visualize that money and put it on the table and think, yeah, that's a lot of money. And just because the project might be 1.5 million or 15 million doesn't make say that we shouldn't be looking after the hundreds of pounds. Yeah, we should do. So the point about that is that we will have a range of values for each apartment or each house or each shop or each office. We will also work those out as a square foot and use comparable values in the area, or as close as we can get, or we will find something that we can actually bring it back to a local value. So that's sort of how we do our GDV. Don't forget, obviously, some things have greater value than others in respect of, you know, in some areas or in many areas, resi is more valuable than commercial. So you try and generally to get your scheme with as least commercial as possible. Sometimes there's a bit of pressure from planners where they like a little bit of commercial because they think it's going to, you know, generate a bit more income locally and jobs and all that sort of stuff. But you know, that's more scheme design really, and demand and all that sort of stuff. But also value the freehold. So yeah, I know, you know, there's still a value to freeholds, particularly in apartment blocks, etc. There's still a value to it. It's not getting the 30 plus times that it was before, but you know, there's still some reasonable amounts of money being paid for it. So don't forget to value it, because you know, it could be worth 60 grand, it could be worth a lot of money. So you don't forget to put that on there. But with any of these things in your full development appraisal, be honest. So where the information comes from, you know, how sound is the information? Just because an agent says to you those 4-bedroom houses are going to sell for 350,000, just because that's what you want to believe, don't necessarily, you know, take it as gospel. You need to actually do a bit more digging. What you really want is somebody else to say, no, they're only going to get 275, because you then have to start questioning it and do a little bit of work. So the GDV for us will have a range, yeah. So, and everything we do will have a range. So we're not got a GDV of 2.3 million or 400,000 or whatever. It is at some point it will come down to a number, because when you're putting stuff to a funder, etc., they want a number, you know, but they also know behind that number there's a little bit of a range there, and sometimes we can include that in contingency, sometimes we won't, sometimes we just keep that to ourselves in respect of, well, that's what we're saying, but actually we feel we can probably achieve a little bit better. So build costs, I'm going through these in a particular order really, just as I remember them. Build cost is key. So, you know, what's included in the build cost. We'll break down the build cost, and we'll generally break it down, not too many rows, we don't need to do too many rows, but that's the structure. That is the building, including the finishes, external and internal to the building. Then we've got, you know, ground, external works, you know, paths, drives, fences and all that sort of thing. And then we've got the road and service connections and drainage and stuff like that. So we'll tend to separate those. If you've got demolition on there, we'd separate that out as well. If you've got something on site, and sometimes if it's something on site, or even if it's a seemingly clean site, there might be remediation works to carry out. So that again will be a separate thing. So anything that's non-standard, if we know that the ground isn't particularly great in that area, just from you know, talking to people, etc., or we've got previous experience, we might have spoken to building control. If we haven't, you know, we might sort of say, well, actually at this point, until we do ground investigations, we are going to allow an extra sum of money, because the ground conditions could be like, if it's a known mining area, we might have to grout the ground and you know, inject it, and you know, with cement, liquid cement, and you know, to solidify it, to sort of stabilize it, sorry, you know. So we will add those as separate rows. If the topography of a site is you know, not even steep, even if it's quite a shallow slope, we will still add extra on, because it costs more money to build that. So our build costs will be, okay, what is the basic build cost, and then what are all those other bits added on. So we know that you can still build a unit for less than £100 a square foot. Now most people will say, no you can't, but actually yes you can. Now, you know, and that isn't always at volume. It's generally economy of scale and volume. But what does that include? It'll include, you know, the specification up to a certain standard. You know, you're not going to get marble worktops if you're building for £100 a square foot. Well, unless you're really, really good. So the build cost has to relate to you and your ability. Now, whether that's partnering with a contractor to actually, you know, who's going to deliver it, and you might be working, you know, as a collaboration, if you like, so they get a bit of the profit, and in return they actually do it at cost, as it were. You might be the main contractor, which is one thing we always sort of, one of the two, be the main contractor or partner with the main contractor, incentivise them at the very least to get the very, very best prices to increase your margin. Now that'll make a lot of difference. So typically the difference between main contractor and doing it yourself, being the main contractor, would be probably a gross difference of about 20%. You know, it varies, but around about that. But if you take on the role as main contractor, then you're taking on a whole load of other work as well. So it's not just a 20%. You've got to, you know, you've got to buy the materials. You know, you've got to read the quantities off. You've got to buy the materials. You've got to be supervising. You're going to have you know, responsibilities for probably the health and safety, if that was part of the main contractor's role. You know, much more project management sort of stuff. So there generally is a cost that would normally vary between 8 and 12% out of that 20%. So it could leave you exactly the same number, 8 to 12%, that is margin that you may well create to go on your bottom line. Now, you know, again, whatever numbers I say, there'll be people that watch this and say, you can't do that. Yeah, I know you can do that. I'm glad to hear somebody say it, you know. But if you're looking for an all-in build cost, which includes your roads and your services, then it's probably not going to be £100 a square foot. If I'm honest, it's going to be more than that. You know, it could be, you know, anywhere from probably 1,400 to maybe 1,600 or something like that. But you generally get them as an all-in price. But if you've got a lot of infrastructure cost, you've got a lot of roads, or you know, I don't know, you got to build a mini roundabout at the front of the site, then actually you know, that's going to increase that cost. So, you know, when somebody says how much is something going to cost, the immediate sort of, you know, answer to that is, what is it you're trying to build? Yeah, how big is it? What shape is it? You know, what specification is it? You know, so there's so many variables. So what we're going to look at in the full development appraisal is the build cost in relation to what it is you're doing. If you're doing, you know, an upmarket, double-story hall and sitting room, executive type house, then you're not going to probably do it for £100 a foot. You know, you could be anywhere, couldn't you? We recently spent some time with Peter Huff, which is Huff House. Most of you probably know that. So, you know, their stuff comes in at sort of 2,600, you know, a metre. So, you know, £250 or so a foot, you know, over double what I'm talking about. But that's plus. That's going to be plus other costs as well, you know, probably plus the kitchen and things like that, you know. But that's a different end. That you don't build those things to sell, you build those to live in. That's your dream home and all that sort of thing, you know. So the build cost is broken down into those different areas, and that gives you a better understanding. So for a road, for instance, is we're looking at a project yesterday, and they've already had a price on that, and it's 90 grand. And actually, we're building a road on another project at the moment that is actually way smaller than that, and it's more than that 90 grand. So we start looking at, well, okay, can they build it for 90,000, or is that wrong? Excuse me. Even if you get quotes, if you like, you know, whether they're quotes or estimates or questimates or whatever you want to call them, you know, the only time you really know what it's cost is when you've had it done and paid the bill. But you need to be fairly comfortable on the cost when you're looking at the full development appraisal, because, you know, the whole of the project's going to be based around this full development appraisal. You know, whether you do it or not, you know, what you're going for, what you're not going for, you know, what works, what doesn't work, how much can we play around with the profit and the finance to actually maybe incentivize the landowner in some way. So there's all sorts of things that come out of it. So it's really important. So moving on to developer contributions, that will get broken down into, depending on where you are, what the criteria is in that particular area. So you might have start off with a community infrastructure levy, so CIL. Now in many areas now, and more and more they will be coming, is a mayoral contribution as well. So effectively there's two lots of CIL. Now that CIL will be dependent on, it's based on a price per square metre, but it could be different zones in different areas, so it isn't always authority wide, and it may well vary as to what you're doing, whether you're doing, you know, if you're doing retail, if you're doing student accommodation, if you're doing pure residential. So that gets split out in there. So you need to, in order to get it into your full development appraisal, you need to understand what it would be in that area for the sort of development that you're proposing. And that's on small developments all the way through. So then aside of that is people possibly would have heard of Section 106. Well, Section 106 encompasses a lot of things. It's just a way of collecting money from a local authority. So it's a developer contribution. So the biggest one generally is affordable housing. So you may have local criteria that say that, I don't know, 30%, 40%. There's different percentages depending where you are. Is required as an on-site provision. So you've got to provide, say, 30% of the homes as on-site provision. So, you know, so we need to understand when we're looking at development, what's the implication of that? I'm going to come back to that. So other developer contributions from the Section 106 are, I think if we have got a list somewhere, but I think it's 35 different things that we've collected, you know, from travel permits through to public art, open space, libraries, schools, you know, special heathland, you know, there's all sorts of different payments that can be collected generally using the Section 106 thing. So, but as I say, the biggest one generally in most areas is affordable. There's still areas that don't have affordable, and they don't have any other Section 106, and they collect money through CIL. And there's other areas that have CIL and affordable, and other areas that don't have CIL, a few still, or quite a few actually, and just collect anything through Section 106. So it's understanding what the liability is going to be, because although it's called a developer's contribution, it's named wrong really in a sense, because it's effectively a value off the land. It's a reduction in land value. It's a tax. It's a land tax. Yeah, but because we don't call it that, we call it a developer contribution, and this is one of the issues that people have when they're talking to landowners or their agents, is they almost think, well, the developer's contribution comes out of the developer's bit. Well, obviously that doesn't quite work like that. So just sort of talk about affordable, and again we will do a whole video on affordable and the tricks and the little bits and pieces that you should be looking out for. But I just want to give it a little bit of an insight here, is because the impact of affordable on the gross developed value is phenomenal, generally in a downward way, but it also can be very positive in a cash flow point of view. If you sell them at the right time and you can get the right contract with the housing association or the registered provider that's going to take them on, it can ease your cash flow, lower your borrowings, and actually the funders like it anyway. Does it have an impact on the overall market value stuff? Not many people would openly say in the establishment, but of course it flipping does. And why would you not say that? Try and get a number. If you got a development without any affordable on it, depending on the nature of development, we would suggest that in some areas that would be at least 10% per square foot or equivalent over and above what you're likely to get on a development that's got affordable on it. And in some cases, I'm not being funny here, but a lot more than that. Now, whether that's right or wrong, that's a matter of opinion, I suppose. But so we can't underestimate the impact of it, and understanding what you will get for affordable units. There's different types of affordable units, and I'm not going to drone on about that today. That will also be a separate video. But there are different, and they have different values. So actually, and what they actually pay you for an affordable unit. The highest we've ever seen is 105% of market value. I don't expect we'll ever see that again, and it was an anomaly, but that's what happened. It was all to do with bedroom tax, and that many years ago, and there was a severe shortage of one-bedroom flats. So for one-bedroom flats or a house that could be put into two one-bedroom flats, so we're paying 105% of market value. But don't expect to come across that again, and it happened quite quickly, and not too many people were able to take advantage of it. But generally, the amount that you will get is based on local value, but a percentage of the local value. So the higher value, the lower percentage you're going to get. So it works the other way, is to say they will give you X amount per square metre or per square foot of a given house size, house type, house style, and specification, so it's actually in some areas that you might see it could be 50% or even less of what the local market value would be. Now, in effect, on the face of it, you're losing money on that, but generally you shouldn't really be paying too much for the land for the social side of things. So people don't understand how to value land, not on sites where there's going to be affordable. So don't overvalue your affordable. Ask somebody that knows, and they are likely to say, well, it's going to be between X and Y. Until you start talking to those providers, and once you've worked with them, you get a good idea of what they're actually prepared to pay. So in terms of the full development appraisal, break down those developer contributions, because they'll have a massive impact on your margin and effectively the land value, if you like. Professional fees. Now, we encompass a lot of things under professional fees, including warranties and building control, all the surveys, all the reports, you know, your planning consultants, your QSs, your cost consultants, architects, you know, all the way through. So everything there comes under professional fees. And yes, it to a degree, it can come back to a percentage, but you know, it can be the percentage. The bigger the project, the less the percentage is likely to be. And also on a smaller project, it could be very much more. But we always sit in and around the, well, from some of the bigger projects at 6.5% up to 15%. You know, on that is based on not the value, based on cost, not based on GDP, but based on build cost, etc. You know, so. You know, that's you know, breaking it all down. What do we need on this project? We need a planning consultant, £5,000. We need an architect, blah blah blah. Break it down. You know, don't just use a percentage, because the difference between 6.5% and 15% is going to make the project work or not. Don't always go for a straightforward 10%. Because there are some projects, and we invest quite a lot of money on landscape and stuff like that in terms of initial surveys and reports, because that helps the planning. So our professional costs are in some ways more than some other developers, but we probably have a better success rate in the planning, so we don't burn as much money, you know. So it might cost us more, but overall it's safer. We're de-risking it by investing that little bit more. So then what we'll have under build cost and professional fees, we'll generally have what am I trying to think of? Contingency, yeah. So we'll have contingency on build cost, obviously, and that depends on what it is and how much you know about it. So, you know, in the industry, they often talk about 3%. We look at 5%. If you load your contingency too much, then it won't work. But you need to load it enough to cover certain things. So going back to utilities, for instance, if you're doing a fair size site and you know, because you've had a services report, etc., done, that there isn't enough electric power in the area, so you're going to have a transformer, or you're going to have to do something, you know that there's perhaps an additional 40 grand, 60 grand, or 250,000, or whatever it is, depending on the scale of it. So they're not contingencies, but they're extra rows that we put in under the build. So the contingencies go in there. We'll sometimes put a contingency on professional fees, but don't always do that. But it's, you know, there's nothing wrong with doing it. What you put into your full development appraisal needs to mean something to you. So even within the industry, there's different words used, and they put different things. They say warranties go in different things. Warranties and building control sometimes go in build costs for some people, you know. And you know, the other thing that you need to think when you're professional fees, well, okay, you know, do you put your sales costs in there? You know, so, you know, which we have been known to do. Sometimes we separate it out because it's less understandable to other people generally when we're presenting it. So, you know, when you're looking at your sales costs, you know, obviously that's going to go in, you know, in terms of your agents, your show homes, and all that sort of thing. So, finance, that's a cracking one. So we obviously, you know, how much do you get your finance for, how much you think you're going to get it for, and you can either put it in as a percentages plus. So if there's any in fees, any out fees, and cost monitoring, you know, so monitoring surveyor fees and stuff like that, we tend to wrap it all up in a percentage, because it generally comes back. So a lot of the stuff we do now is at 10%, which should there or thereabouts include most of the fees, and so what we actually do with the finance on there is obviously we're looking at financing all of it. Now, some of it might be our own money, but you're still looking for a return on 100% of the money. So we don't put it in any different. If you've got perhaps an equity investor or whatever that's wanting more for it, that's not going to come in this finance bit. Effectively, they want more for it. That comes out of your profit, because if you try and do all of it, it's very difficult to make anything stack up, which is hard anyway. But if you're just putting barriers in your own way. So we will look at that and pretty sort of, you know, just very, very basically, you know, we'll look at how long the project is, how long the hold might be in order to refinance or we think to sell. So it might be a 15-month build. Don't always fall into there, it's always going to take a year, because there are very few projects that take exactly a year. You know, smaller projects might take less, you know, and it's from day one when you're buying the site, you know, so you might have the land a lot longer than your build period. You know, you might have the land for 6 months or 3 months. We tend not to do that, but some people work that way. They don't realise how long it's going to pre-construction, etc. is going to take normally. That's why they end up holding for a lot longer. But in the finance section of the full development appraisal, the FDA, we simply break it down into land, how long, the whole amount for the whole period, and then the build cost. This is just, you know, again, it's not, we're not even at this point not getting into real detail. We're not doing cash flow forecasts at this point, but the way we do it, we know we've got some coverage in there. So we will look at all of the build cost, including the professional fees, the contributions, if they're cash contributions, depending where they're actually, when they're payable, etc. Because some contributions can be at the end, so we don't necessarily have to put them into early. So all of those costs we'll put in there, and we will use what we call a burn rate of 50%. So we will say we've got all of the money in there for 50% of the time, because effectively you start off spending nothing and you end up spending 100%. So halfway through, you in theory would have spent 50%. Don't quite work like that, but it's on your side. So that's what we put in there. You know, makes it quite straightforward in terms of what the finance is. Developer's profit, you know, that's really linked generally to either cost or to the gross development value, the GDV. So you see all sorts of things that are punted around there, and so we will generally be looking at 20% on GDV, 17.5% on cost, or 20% on cost. So there's a little bit of flex there, depending on, you know, how safe is this, what type of, how big is it, how many units are there, how many have we got to get rid of before we've paid everybody back. So it's obviously the development funding gets paid back first, and then you know effectively you as the lead developer gets your money last. You know, hopefully there's still some there, but you need to build in the full development appraisal what that profit could look like. And then what we do is we add all up all the costs, take them all away from the gross development value, and that ends up with what the site value is worth, including purchase costs, etc. You know, so that then tells us on the high level numbers, have we gone in with the right sort of amount in terms of offers that we're talking about. But those of you that have watched when we're talking about making offers, offers are relatively flexible from our point of view. They might start with a fixed number, but then it will be plus, minus, minus. So all sorts of different things that come into it. When we first start talking, then we'll talk about a range of value, because like we said, everything has a range of value. But when you start getting into much more detailed discussion and negotiation, you forget about the range and you start talking about a fixed number, and then you fix that number, and then you add to it, subtract to it, depending on what the unknowns are. So unknowns, all of the costs are all unknowns. So there's all sorts of things that you can do around about that. So that brings you back, that brings you to your residual site value. So what we can do with residual site value then is we can take that back to the deal structure and say, right, okay, we have a site value of £400,000. We have potentially a profit there of 20% of the GDV, so it's another £400,000. So we've got £800,000 that we can potentially work with a landowner in some sort of collaboration. So we can buy it for £400,000. That's it, done deal, away we go. And then we've got £400,000 that we hope to retain as the lead developer, or we might have to collaborate, partner with others for a share of that. Or we can potentially look at, with the same site value, is buying it for £100,000 now, whereby we won't really need too much in the way of equity, because it's most funders will accept this. You're buying it cheap. you know, but there are, you know, probably a second charge on there for the landowner to protect themselves, so you can't sell it from under them or whatever. They will get their £300,000, probably plus quite a bit more, because they're allowing you to do this with effectively they're providing the equity, if you like. But don't make this complicated. The whole point of the FDA is to work out the numbers so you know that what you've got to work with. So you can have a site value of, say, 400,000. In fact, no, we've got one at the moment. We've even better one that we're talking with somebody at the moment. Is we think the value is, if I remember this rightly, might not be quite right, but we think that the site value is about 800,000, something like that. They're looking for 1.7 million. And actually, we can get to 1.7 million, providing we don't buy it at 800,000. We buy it at perhaps 100 or maybe 2 at a push, yeah. And we will then save some money on some funding, and the equity isn't going to cost us too much because they're providing it. They'll get, you know, basic coupon value possibly so they're getting a little bit of a return on the money, you know, 6%, 8%, maybe even 10%. But then they'll get the rest of the money will come out of our profit. If our profit's big enough and they are prepared to do a deal like that, it's a really win-win. We'll only get to 1.7 on there if the values pick up. I think our quick numbers on it were, or I shouldn't say quick numbers, our high level numbers on that, I think we can probably get to 1.5, you know, reasonably okay. 1.7 they're going to have to rely on the market going up, and you know, whether that's likely to happen in any time soon is, you know, yeah, that's another thing, isn't it? But you know, I've talked quite a bit about costs, a bit more about individual costs than probably I should have done at this point. As I say, we'll be covering all individual costs as we go through different videos, but it's just really, you know, the spreadsheet's got to be accurate. Now, not just your opinion, you know, and that's why you use a range of numbers, you know, and so, you know, but it's about getting some surety, some certainty, some feel good about the numbers, and it also will highlight areas of you don't know. As soon as you start splitting it down, so say for instance, there's not enough electricity, can we get a price from the local provider in terms of what's the supply going to cost? Well, they're getting better, and in some areas you can get a bit of an indication, in other areas you won't know for months. So you've got to sort of say, well, could it cost between 40,000 and 120,000? We've got £80,000 swing, yeah. So we need to try and narrow that a little bit. Where we can't narrow those gaps, like, you know, where we sit at the moment in terms of pandemics and things like that, we've got unknown gross developed value, unknown end values, then what we're actually looking at doing there is we've got a bigger gap. It could be worth, say, you know, that 2-bedroom apartment could be worth 200,000, or it could be worth 300,000. So we've got a massive swing. We will use those big gaps as conditions in the deal structure in some form or other. We will only do it if the landowner, the site owner, is going to share the risk. If they're not going to share the risk, we just move on. So the FDA is really important to get the understanding of where those wide-ranging numbers are, and actually, if we can't get assurance on them, then like end values is typically, we can't get end values, then if they're not prepared to condition it, we're either going to buy a real, assume the worst, or we don't go there at all. So, yeah, probably time for me to go. This has been Richard Little from Your Land Partner, and I will see you again on another occasion. Ta-da.